All right, hello everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar this afternoon. Thanks for being with us today. I apologize that we had to delay the start time a little bit, and thank you for sticking it out and being with us. We'll try to still wrap up by 3 p.m., which was the initial time we were going to close. But in the interim, we're going to share with you all sorts of good information about the admissions process here at SCO, especially for those of you who may have applied once before and are looking at ways to increase the competitiveness of your application. That's the focus today. And with me, I should say, my name is Rebecca. I'm the Student Services and Admissions Officer here. With me today, I have Mike Robertson, who's the Director of Admissions and Enrollment Services. He will be able to give you all sorts of great information and answer questions you might have as well. So we encourage you to use the functionality of the GoToWebinar to submit your questions either through the chat box or the question and answer box. We'll keep an eye on those as we go. And of course, any questions we don't answer during the presentation, we'll come back to at the end. Before we get started, I want to plug a couple things coming up. The first of which is the Optometry Virtual Fair that's hosted by ASCO, which is the Association for Schools and Colleges of Optometry. And this is a really, really cool thing that they do. I encourage you guys to check it out. They invite representatives from all optometry schools in the country to come together in a virtual platform and basically sit in a chat room and answer questions from anybody who registers. And so if you have questions and you want to be able to talk to representatives from multiple schools, this is a great opportunity to do that. Even if you don't have specific questions on your mind, you can go into those chat rooms and read transcripts and see what other students have asked and maybe get some information that really wasn't even on your mind to begin with. So it's June 11th, and each school gets to determine when they'll have representatives available in their chat rooms, so you can see that if you go onto this website and register. I hope to see some of your names pop up on that day. I'll be sitting and representing SCO and answering all sorts of questions, so hope you'll join us. And then in June, the next webinar that we'll do at SCO is about the application process. So the checklist, timeline, and tips, if you guys have been through the application cycle once before, it won't be revolutionary information. Nothing has changed too dramatically, but if you want a good refresher, it's going to be a little bit more detailed in terms of the actual application process, the functionality, the timeline. Today, we're going to focus on ways to improve, so we won't go into as much detailed information about exactly what you need to submit, so on and so forth. So it's still a good one to attend. Then July, we'll do a little bit of a virtual tour of our campus, and August will be the interview skills session. So some really great ones coming up for people who are planning to apply in this upcoming cycle. As I mentioned, feel free to submit your questions along the way today. And then without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, who will go through the presentation and give you all sorts of great information.
Hi, everyone. It's Mike Robertson, as Rebecca said, and I've been doing this about 20 years at SCO, so I've seen a lot of applications and reapplications and such. And when you look at on your screen at the objectives we have today, the first one is really sometimes the most important, and that's also the hardest for those of us in admissions to deal with often, because sometimes it comes to a point where a candidate needs to determine if indeed he or she is a viable candidate for reapplication. So we'll talk about that some, what you need to submit, and then the best steps to do after you apply. So to start off, we're going to talk a little bit about what may have affected your competitiveness. And for us, the biggest issue probably is always going to be lower GPA and OAT score. And to give you an idea of those, you've probably heard them ad nauseum, but just so you know, the GPA average this year is pushing a 3.6, and the OAT score is right at 330. Now, that's not the numbers you have to be admitted, because to get an average, obviously you have low numbers and high numbers. But for a GPA, it's difficult if you have an average below 2.75. And for an OAT, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, if your OAT is below 300. So you might say, hey, well, I'm a 2.79 and I have a 300. Well, that doesn't mean you're going to be admitted. That just tells you you're at the lower end of those extremes, and it's going to be difficult. So if you have GPAs, like I just said, OAT scores, like I just said, then you need to think about either retaking the test or doing things to boost your GPA. Inadequate experience, that usually is a factor that makes a poor application even worse, because you may have somebody with lower numbers and they've done very little in the field as far as shadowing or working. And when we say shadowing or working, we don't necessarily mean working in one office for a ton of hours but never experiencing another office. Poor interview performance, if that's the case, then that means you obviously were good enough on paper to get for an interview, but something happened in that interview that just we weren't as comfortable with, or we put it in relation to the rest of your file and found that it wasn't a complete file and a complete match. And then really the last thing listed there, late application, probably affects many more people than just about anything else, because once we hit January, we're usually pushing 100 deposits toward a class of 136. So your chances have narrowed quite a bit. And if you apply late February and on the deadline of March 1, sometimes we get candidates with really good files who just applied so late that it's just, we're already full at that point, because we are on rolling admissions, as are most schools. And when you're on rolling admissions, you kind of have a philosophy of take the good candidate when you have him or her. There are at least one school, maybe two, that wait and do it in mass. But I don't want to have any part of en masse admissions processing. So again, we tend to take the best candidates as they come along. And there's a very good graphic for you showing, if you look down that list for the mean GPA, I think just glancing, the lowest you see is 3.47, and that was 10 years ago. But after that, it's just about all 3.5 and above. And then the OAT, one thing you have to keep in mind about the OAT is they changed their scoring a few years ago, and that shifted. I'm not going to go into all those details, but it shifted the mean OAT score. And so you can see there, like 2009, it shows the mean OAT is 339. I don't have the data in front of me, but my guess is that either in 2010 or 11 is when the shift occurred, because you can see all those averages drop about 10 points. And so again, it's not necessarily that you have to have a 330 or 320, but we do tend to look at GPA and OAT both quite a bit. And so the way we put it is, if you've got a lower GPA, you need to have a higher OAT, and then vice versa. A great OAT score gives you a little bit more slack in your GPA. The rest of that is pretty straightforward. You can see how many applications. They generally hover between 700 and 850, and that hasn't changed, unfortunately, in quite some time. That does not mean if we enroll 136 that your chances are 1 in 7 or 1 in 8, because to enroll 136, we usually have to offer seats to at least 200, I would say, maybe 225 or more. So your chances are really closer to 1 in 4. So again, we hate to emphasize numbers, but at the same time, we feel like we have to, because that is those are two of the biggest things that we're going to look at when we review files. The other thing on there I'd say is the BS degree, and you see that very rarely do we have more than a couple of people without a degree. Generally, our rule of thumb is you need to have those numbers in front of you or better in order to be competitive without a degree. Now, keep in mind that means enrolling without a degree. Everybody just about applies without a degree. We're talking about beginning the school year at SCO and not having already earned at least a bachelor's degree. So if you are a college sophomore right now, the chances will be tougher without a degree. If you're a junior, then your chances have automatically increased. And one more note about that, and we'll talk about this later, is the attainment of a master's degree. Sometimes that's applicable and sometimes it's not. And again, we'll talk about that just a little bit later. Okay, and there's a little bit later, huh? So let's say your GPA hovers around a 2.75 and your OATs at 310 or 320. You really need to prove yourself. And what I generally will advise a candidate is, if you have a good to decent OAT score, then a graduate degree may not be what you want to do. A graduate school most of the time is an all A or all A's and B's program. It's not a law in any state, of course, or a policy at any institution, really, but that's what happens. Very seldom do we see C's or D's or F's on a master's transcript. So by completing a master's and making A's and B's, it doesn't always show us that you have really mastered the level of material. It shows us you got through that program, but since they don't award C's, D's, and F's, we sometimes wonder if the grades would be lower. So I don't generally advise a graduate degree unless both your OAT and your GPA are on the lower end, and then the attainment of a graduate degree can be something that I hate to put it like this, but it gives you something to fall back on. So let's say you go to a master's program and it's a 36, 33 hours, whatever. You do okay, but you still don't get admitted. At that point, you have something, a piece of paper, another credential that will open some doors for you. If you're, on the other hand, you're like a 300, something like that, or maybe you've got a 340 on the OAT or higher, but your GPA is still lacking, then what we usually say is go back to undergrad and either repeat some courses that you made C's and D's in, or take new upper level courses in the sciences. So you may not have had anatomy, physiology, genetics, cell biology, etc. If you haven't, a good way to prove yourself is to go enroll in at least 12 semester hours, make all A's and B's, and then you've given us something to look at and say, well, they stumbled a little bit in the first go round, but this time they're doing better. You can't just repeat everything you made a C or a D in, because at some point we're going to say, well, you're taking it the second time around, certainly you should make a better grade. So you need to have a mixture often. Let's say physics was a downfall. Take a physics course, or repeat a physics course, and then throw in some biology, maybe a chemistry, etc. You just want to put your best foot forward, and part of putting your best foot forward is going to be taking those courses through a 4-year college or university. And I will throw 1 or 2 exemptions in there. If you're a California resident, the community college system in California is pretty good. So we would probably have a little more flexibility or latitude with that. But the majority of programs, even California, it's a bit of a watered down version often of what you would have at a 4-year school. So we really emphasize taking and repeating new courses at a university or a 4-year college. I know that that is difficult sometimes because of schedules and you work, but you need to dig around. You can often find good online courses. The University of New England being a school that we've recommended before. The University of California at Berkeley has a good online program with science courses. And really, most major universities now have programs that are going to offer you something online that is a pretty good deal. And generally, I don't know if I should tell you this or not, but I'm going to. We don't always know whether you took the course online, traditionally in the classroom, or whatever method. A transcript comes in from a school, and I don't think I've yet to see one that came in that said, this course was online, this course was in the classroom, this course was offered by whatever means. So we don't always see that. And I think students sometimes are a little paranoid that they take an online course and we're not going to accept it. Well, it is in writing that we do. What we say is, if it has a lab then and you need that lab, that's starting to get a little difficult. There is some thought in biology circles, if you will, that some of the anatomy labs that are offered online are better than in-person ones because of the technology. You can see things 3D, etc. And maybe that's the case, but it's probably hard to get another biology or a physics course that's offered online with a lab offered online. So if you're repeating a course, we generally don't require you to repeat the lab, but you just need to shop. You're not doing yourself any favors to make an A in a course and you really didn't master that material. So don't be so consumed with, I need an A, so I'm going to take it to the community college, when it should be, hey, a B is okay, maybe even a C if I learn that material. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Okay, experience. We've italicized the word several, and that's for a reason. Again, we've had candidates, and I'm not exaggerating, candidates with thousands of hours, and I have written more than one candidate and said, I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but we want you to shadow a little more in a different office, and maybe even just 5 to 10 hours. But if your brain has been formed by one office, you begin to think that this is the only way to complete this test or perform this procedure or whatever. And you may go to the next office and they treat it totally differently. A new light has been opened for you. Or maybe you're working in an office that's primary care and they really don't get into a lot of ocular disease treatment or something like that. They never have an ophthalmologist that comes. Then find an ophthalmology office to visit. Find an office that ODs and MDs are working together. You want to see as many different procedures and processes as possible. One area that sticks out often is vision therapy. We've seen candidates with tons of hours who don't know what vision therapy is. Now, we're not going to decline somebody's admission because they don't know what vision therapy is, but their road into optometry school is going to be a little smoother if they will go spend time in an office that performs vision therapy, that performs treatment of diseases. Again, it's all about the variety. Plus, I always remind candidates, shadowing is free education. They're not charging you and you're learning things. It's not costing you a penny. If you're good enough, they might hire you, so you're making money to learn things. And so when you come into optometry school, your base is a little broader than maybe some of your classmates. That gives you a leg up sometimes. The other thing is just looking at journals and professional literature. You don't have to be an optometrist to get a copy of AOA News or some other optometric publication. A lot of state optometric associations will allow you to attend their annual meetings. They sometimes even have, I think Texas has sessions, workshops specifically for students. So, and SCO is the big one in the South that's normally in Atlanta. And there's lots of sessions there you can attend. So, you know, get online, look at some information. Nobody expects you to memorize optometric procedures and tell us medical and scientific terminology all the time, but knowing about it can help. The same thing goes for the political process. If you are not aware, you need to be aware that what you do as an optometrist varies from state to state because legislatures are different from state to state. And one legislature says we agree that optometrists can prescribe Schedule II drugs, and the next state says no, we don't believe that. We're not going to allow it. And Arkansas just became the fifth state to allow laser procedures for an optometrist. So that opens up a whole new window, whereas you may go across the line back into Missouri, Tennessee, Louisiana, or Mississippi, and you can't perform laser procedures. So state lines make a big difference. Of course, the goal is for optometry that one day all states will allow laser procedures, but at this point, that's not necessarily the case. So that's why I tell candidates, if you're going on a trip and it's a multi-state trip and you know you're going through the Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Alaska allows it, you maybe try to set up a shadowing opportunity on that trip. It's an hour or two with an OD who has more privileges, you could learn a lot. So don't forget that shadowing can occur in multiple places. It doesn't just have to be in your hometown or your college town or whatever. So reach out and ask others to help you get into some more offices. The interview, like I said, if you make it to the interview phase, a lot of people think that guarantees an admission. It certainly doesn't the later we get in the year, when we get past January and into February and March. But it doesn't in August, September, October necessarily. Sometimes a candidate comes and it's quite clear that he or she really is using optometry as a rebound. He or she was not admitted to medical school or veterinary school or whatever, and they've done the least amount possible to prepare for optometry, and they come in and we see that and we hold up the file. Again, no one is asking you to be an expert, but for example, simply not understanding that a state legislature dictates what you do, that can be a little bit of a red flag. Not understanding that some of the relationship between ophthalmology and optometry shows you really haven't studied the profession. You will be in charge of people's vision for the rest of your professional career. And we don't take that lightly, nor should you. Some candidates think of glasses and contact lenses, and they think that's all optometry is, and that is so far removed from what it is. You are the primary care vision provider. Estimates are that between 70 and 85% of all vision care is done by an optometrist, not an ophthalmologist. So be prepared for that interview, not only educationally, but also from a behavioral perspective. We've had candidates curse in interviews. We've had candidates cry. And I'm not going to throw the full stone at crying because sometimes personal matters make it into the conversation and it can be emotional. But we've had people show up in blue jeans. I'm sorry, this is not undergraduate school. You're probably not going to practice most of the time in blue jeans, but you certainly shouldn't show up to an interview. You got to think about it like a job interview. And I don't think you're going to show up to job interviews sloppily dressed. And for young ladies, sometimes that means making sure the length of your skirt or your dress is appropriate. That means not wearing leggings that you wear to go to yoga practice. So you have to look like a professional and act like a professional. And sometimes that simply means knowing how to shake someone's hand properly, how to maintain eye contact, Do not use or overuse slang, and certainly eliminate the use or overuse of the word like. When you're in a room one-on-one with a professor or a staff member and all you do is say like every other word, it becomes so distracting that for me personally, I can't even hear what the person is saying, because in my head, I'm counting the number of times the word like is said. So one thing to think about is to have, most universities and colleges have interview or career counseling type offices, and you can go there and do mock interviews, or just get someone you know, maybe not your best friend, because your best friend's gonna tell you did great. Maybe somebody who you know peripherally, to get you established maybe some questions, or get them to and ask you, and then get them to critique you. The best thing to do is put that phone down that you're texting with and have someone video you, because when you are videoed, you then see all your flaws plain and simple right in front of your face. People don't often realize that they're fidgeting, that they're playing with their hair, heaven forbid that they're chewing gum. And let me just quickly clarify that you're talking or you're listening to a gum chewer right now, but I know better than to chew gum in an interview, in a professional meeting, etc. So we want you to be yourself, but if yourself is a little relaxed, sometimes you may have to, just professionalize it a bit, if you will. So even though, like I said, we want you to be honest, we want you to be who you are, you still have to maintain some professional decorum. For example, when you go on an interview, and at SCO, 99.9% of our interviews are conducted by faculty members. Faculties have an earned doctorate. So it's really not professional to look at your interview and say, hey, Tom, or hey, Sally. You need to get their last name and refer to them by doctor, whoever that is. So again, pay attention to the small details. Okay, let's talk about apply early, apply early, apply early. Some people don't understand that, and I really don't know how to emphasize it anymore. Even if you know you're taking fall courses that we're going to look at, don't wait till December to apply. Really, we always say apply by October 1, sometimes earlier. If you're applying from, let's say, Arkansas, Georgia, Tennessee, those are probably the 3 most competitive states in order to receive state tuition assistance. That's why they're so competitive. And you apply in October, your chances are maybe gone completely. And we're not talking about $50 a semester. We're talking upwards of $19,000 to $20,000 a year. And you missed that money simply because you applied too late. Again, remember, we do first come, first served. So first candidates from Georgia, Arkansas, etc., are generally the first ones to receive a contract seat and that tuition assistance. So there's no reason to wait. Let's say you're taking the OAT on August 20th, and you're thinking, well, I need to wait till August 20th to apply. No, you don't. Apply, tell us when you're taking the test, and then scan the score sheet, or take a photo of it and email it to me when you take the test, and that way I can get those scores quickly. But you want to go ahead and apply to Optomcast. It begins this year. I think the date is June 27th, but July 1 is a good date to remember. So sometime July or August. If there's special circumstances you feel we should know, you can certainly call or email me. But once we get your Optomcast application and the SCO supplemental application, we start corresponding with you. If your application comes in and we see something we think you need to do to be more competitive, we'll tell you. If we're waiting on an OAT score, you've had one score and you're taking it again, we're just probably going to wait until that second score to advise you on anything. So, and along those lines, remember that fully upwards of 20 to 25% of our entering students took the OAT twice. It's when you get to 3 times and above that the percentages turn against you. Those taking it 3 times or more only comprise about 5% of enrolling students. So certainly when you get to that 4th attempt, it becomes extremely difficult to be admitted. There's only maybe 4 versions of the test, so we know at that point you should have a better score. But if you have a better score, the thinking often is, oh, well, they just memorized the test because they've now had it 4 times. So try to do your best on that first attempt. Certainly second attempts are fine, and occasionally a third attempt is fine. It's just when you get above and beyond that. But you'll see on that graphic, that chart, that we start selecting people for interviews. We start interviewing in August now and go all the way through basically the end of March. So if your file is competitive, not competitive when it comes in, that doesn't mean you can't be interviewed. Sometimes people apply in July and August and they're not interviewed till December, January, or February. It just depends on how competitive that the pool is. But once you complete an interview, that's when we review that file as a committee and make a decision. Sometimes the decision is a non-decision, and that means we might say, hey, we have been impressed, but we want to wait on your fall grades. In admissions, you kind of have a bit of paranoia that you're going to admit someone, and then here come fall grades a week or 2 later, and they made straight C's and D's. So often if we get to December, we will wait on fall grades if the candidate has more of a marginal GPA and OAT. Okay. I like to emphasize to candidates that you cannot imagine what it was like before Optomcast. And for example, if you went to 4 schools, you just took 1 course here, 1 course there during the summers or whatever. You had to have all 4 transcripts sent directly to SCO, all your letters of reference to SCO, and to any other school to which you applied. The average candidate applies to about 5 schools. So you had to send 5 sets of everything. And let me tell you, it was not a streamlined process at all. So Optomcast has solved that, and now they've even gotten better at reapplying. When you reapply, when you click that, it basically populates, I think, basically your entire file. Maybe some things are not there. You don't necessarily, they will tell you don't have to send a transcript, but I'm going to pretty much ask you to do that. And the reason being is if you send a transcript, even if you graduated, how do I know that you didn't go back, take 6 courses and fail every one of them? I know I'm being a little far-fetched there, but that's how people get into schools that don't need to get into schools. So we often will tell you, we need a new transcript. We need it updated so we can see if you've taken new courses. We do not require a new advisor / biology professor, chemistry professor letter, but we do need a new OD letter each year. So even if Optomcast repopulates the letter you got from Dr. Jones, you either need to go back to Dr. Jones and have him or her provide a new letter, or you need to find a new optometrist to provide a letter. The essay, it's again not totally necessary to rewrite it, but update it and talk about what you've done since you first applied. And what we're talking about is, let's say you applied the first time, you were denied admission, and here comes your file again, and I see the essay and it says exactly what it said the year before. My first thought is, well, what have you done differently? So you want to hit that head on, and somewhere in that essay, even if you just insert it where it flows properly, if you insert a paragraph that says, initially I was declined admission and was told that I needed to do A, B, and C, and since that point I have done the following, or whatever. or maybe you developed a deeper appreciation for it, or maybe your first time you wrote your essay, you look back on it and go, man, this was not a good essay. Then rewrite the whole thing. Again, we're gonna wipe our slate clean, so you kind of need to do the same thing to a limit. Again, you don't have to necessarily go take new courses or whatever, but we do want to see that you've done some things to try to improve from the year before. Excuse me. Let me throw one caveat in there. If you had a great file and you just applied too late, then the key is just to apply early. So sometimes if the only thing we told you was, hey, you just applied too late, then you don't necessarily have to redo everything. But I'm going to tell you right now, there may be somebody listening to this. I am totally amazed at the people who apply in February one year and turn right back around the next year and apply in February. Even if you've done some things to improve your file, by applying late in the cycle, you've already put one nail in the coffin. So if the school tells you, hey, next year apply early, don't turn around and apply late again. That's just wasting your time and my time, actually. Okay, after you get in your application, that's when, let's say you send it in, I'll write you back and say, hey, everything's good, but we really want to rate on your OAT scores or your new scores or whatever. Then you, in between time, can send us updates. I think at some point you can update an Optomcast file. What I always tell candidates, if you update an Optomcast and I'm looking at 750, I'm liable to miss it, or 750 files. So maybe just send me a brief note and say, wanted to add this to my file. I now have shadowed 5 hours at an ophthalmology office. I was able to see multiple surgeries, et cetera, et cetera. So you can update us. The other thing is asking questions. I make a joke all the time that do not call me every day and tell me what the weather is like in your hometown or where you are, because I don't want to know. What I want to know is what you've done to make yourself a better candidate. So always feel free to call or email as long as it's something substantive or pertinent to your application. Again, talk to lots of optometrists, talk to your advisor, those types of things, and then follow through. The thing that amazes me also is when a candidate applies and I write him or her and I say, hey, you really need to shadow at least 10 more hours or at least 20 more, whatever I tell that person. But we're going to go ahead and invite you for an interview because you'll still have plenty of time to do that shadowing. And then they come for the interview, and the first question I ask is, hey, were you able to do some more shadowing? And when the answer is no, or I hear an excuse, I'm not saying that's going to get your file declined, but it's certainly not helping anything. And trust me, there have been people who were declined because we made it very clear what we expected and they did not do it. They didn't follow through. So always follow through. Always, if you're concerned you haven't heard from us, send a note and say, because I will tell you this also, the older I get, the more I forget. And even though I try to make it a personal goal to touch every file more than once and to know my candidates as well as possible, things fall through the crack. When you're covered up in October, September with files and you're literally, it's just like a little mouse or a hamster in one of those little wheels going around and around. Something falls through the cracks. I didn't see the new OAT scores. Never hesitate if you think, why didn't I hear from them? I made a 340 on my retake or whatever. Reach out and say, hey, I'm just checking to see if you got my new scores and what it looks like. There are candidates who are in school now as we speak because they reached out, I revisited a file or saw something I overlooked and it got them admitted.
All right, so we've come to the end. Thank you, Mike. We do have a couple questions, and please, guys, take a minute if you have questions of your own to type those into the question box on the system. So let me read this first question. It says, as a non-traditional student, I have undergraduate GPA. I have a GPA from the last couple of years as a non-degree student, and then science GPA. Which GPA do you usually look at when considering an applicant?
Well, we actually look at cumulative, excuse me, probably more than anything. But when it comes to non-traditional students, or any student really, we put more emphasis on the last 2 years. That comes into play often for candidates who started off poorly, and literally we see people who just, there's no way to recover. Their GPA was so bad. But they go on, they move forward, and they make all A's and B's in their junior and senior year. Well, that's when your toughest courses are. So you're doing something to impress us. The opposite can work against you. You do really well in the lower level courses, you get to upper level and the grades plummet. Or you go 2 years to community college, have a 4.0, and then you go to a university and the grades plummet. So we're going to look at all GPAs. We have our own prerequisite GPA, which will account for the psychology, statistics, English, everything. And then Optomcast gives us about 20 GPAs, I'm going to estimate. And so we're going to look at those. But again, we're going to look at the last couple of years. If you're non-traditional and have only been able to go back to school part-time, and you haven't been full-time for, let's say, 5 years, 6 years, we're really going to push you to take a full load at least one semester, because the first semester here is 23.5 hours, and going from taking 6 hours a term for 3 years and then taking 23.5 can be very daunting. So anyone that has returned to school, non-traditional, whatever terms you want to use, if he or she has not been full-time or is taking all those courses at a community college, we're going to cast a more leering eye at that. But again, 2 years, the last 2 years being in good shape, even if your cumulative GPA is a 2.7 or 2.8 or so, and we probably admitted 2.5 and 2.6 for people who had very strong OATs. So it's when you get below 2.5 that it's totally difficult. But again, cumulative GPA is probably number one. Then the science and prerequisite GPAs are after that.
Excellent. All right, we're going to leave it open for more questions. Another minute or so. Thank you all out there for being with us this afternoon. Once again, don't forget about that SCO virtual fair, which will be in June. I encourage you to consider registering for that today. Okay, here's another question. A student who lives in Georgia, can you recommend an optometrist in the surrounding area to shadow or give further information or tips?
Yeah, I can't do it off the top of my head, but if you will email me at mike.robertson@sco.edu and give me some details like, or what the name of the town, or if you're going to school somewhere, and you could give me two choices, where the school is and the second one your hometown. We often can find ODs in most areas, especially in a place like Georgia where we have thousands of practicing alums. So sure, feel free. It may take me a day or two or whatever, but we have given referrals many times. And if you're in the Atlanta area, you're certainly going to have lots to choose from. So just shoot me an email and I'll be glad to give you a referral.
Great. I think that looks like it's it. Let me double check. All right, well, we will post a recording of this session on our YouTube page. You can reach out to us anytime for follow-up questions. I have the admissions email address here, which is something that I check. If you have questions specific for Mike, you can reach out to him or to me, and I can forward it to him, whatever's easiest for you. But don't be shy. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you have along the way. So thanks once again, and hope to see you guys at a future webinar or at the virtual fair. Have a good afternoon.